busy streets of Lagos, his heart beating fast with excitement and a little fear. He had dreamed of this moment for years, and finally, he had made it to the big city. The bright lights and tall buildings seemed to stretch up to the sky, very different from the small village he came from. Emmanuel took a deep breath and started walking towards the city center, his small suitcase by his side. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but he knew he needed to find a place to stay and start looking for a job. He wanted to make a good life for himself and send money back to his family in the village. As he walked, Emmanuel couldn't help but feel amazed at how big and busy the city was. Everyone was rushing to and from like they were in a hurry to get somewhere. He felt a little doubt, wondering if he really belonged here. After walking for hours, Emmanuel finally found a small, rough-looking hostel that offered cheap accommodation. He paid for a week's stay and collapsed onto the narrow bed, exhausted. The next morning, Emmanuel set out to explore the city and start his job search. He had no connections, no experience, and no idea where to begin. He walked for hours, giving his resume to anyone who would take it, but every door he knocked on seemed to be met with rejection. As the sun began to set, Emmanuel found himself at a small park, feeling defeated and lost. He thought of his family back in the village, counting on him to make a better life for them. He wondered if he had made a mistake by leaving. Just then, a group of street vendors started setting up their stalls nearby. Emmanuel watched as they expertly sold their goods, calling out to passerby with practiced ease. He realized that even they had found a way to survive in this tough city. With newfound determination, Emmanuel stood up, dusting off his pants. He would not give up. He would find a way to make it here, no matter what it took. But as he turned to leave, Emmanuel's stomach growled, reminding him that he had barely eaten all day. He had spent his last bit of money on accommodation, and now he was faced with the harsh reality of hunger in the city. Emmanuel sat on the narrow bed in his small hotel room, his stomach growling with hunger. He had been searching for a job for days, but every door he knocked on seemed to be met with rejection. His suitcase, once full of hope and dreams, now felt like a burden, weighing him down with every passing moment. As he sat, the scorching sun beat down on the hotel, making the room feel like an oven. Emmanuel's throat parched. He longed for a sip of water, but he had no money to buy even a bottle of sachet water. He thought of his family back in the village, wondering how they would cope if he failed. Emmanuel's eyes scanned the small room, searching for a glimmer of hope. But all he saw were the peeling walls and the worn-out bedspread. He felt trapped with no way out. As the day wore on, Emmanuel's hunger pangs grew stronger. He hadn't eaten since the previous day, and his body began to feel weak and lightheaded. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water on his face, but it did little to revive him. In desperation, Emmanuel left the hotel, hoping to find something, anything, to eat. He walked the streets, his eyes scanning the ground for scraps, but found nothing. He approached street vendors, hoping for a kind face, but they chased him away, shouting at him to leave their wares alone. As night began to fall, Emmanuel returned to his hotel room, defeated. He collapsed onto the bed, his body racked with hunger and his spirit crushed. He thought of his family, wondering if they would ever see him again. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes as he realized how far he had fallen. Just then, a knock came at the door. It was the hotel owner, reminding Emmanuel that he had only 2 days left to pay for his stay. If he couldn't come up with the money, he would be thrown out onto the streets. Emmanuel, with no other options, begged the owner for an extension, promising to pay as soon as he found a job. The owner, a hard-faced woman, relented but warned Emmanuel that she wouldn't wait forever. As the night wore on, Emmanuel lay on the bed, his mind racing with worry. How would he pay for his stay? How would he find a job? And how would he survive in this cruel city? The next morning, Emmanuel trudged through the streets, his stomach growling with hunger. He had been searching for a job for days, but every door he knocked on seemed to be met with rejection. His heart, once full of hope and dreams, now felt like a burden, weighing him down with every step. As he walked, the scorching sun beat down on him, relentless in its ferocity. Emmanuel's throat parched. He longed for a sip of water, but he had no money to buy even a bottle of sachet water. He thought of his family back in the village, wondering how they would cope if he failed. Emmanuel's eyes scanned the crowded streets, searching for a glimmer of hope. But all he saw were people rushing to and from, their faces set in determined lines. No one seemed to notice him, no one seemed to care. As the day wore on, Emmanuel's hunger pangs grew stronger. He hadn't eaten since the previous day, and his body began to feel weak and lightheaded. He stumbled, almost falling to the ground, but managed to catch himself just in time. In desperation, Emmanuel turned to the street vendors, hoping to find something, anything, to eat. But they chased him away, shouting at him to leave their wares alone. One of them, a kind-faced woman, took pity on him and offered him a few scraps of food, but it was hardly enough to fill his empty belly. Then, besides the woman's store, I saw a flyer on the notice board. Work available at the new building site on Ojul Legba Road. Good pay, but hard work. I ripped off a tab with the contact information and stuffed it into my pocket. I made my way to the site, my heart racing with hope. Maybe this was the break I needed. When I arrived, I saw a group of laborers waiting to be assigned tasks. I joined them, my mind racing with thoughts of what I would do. The engineer, Mr. Ade, assigned me to work on the foundation. I worked hard, but every time I was caught sleeping on the job, my daily pay would be deducted. I couldn't even meet up with the hotel's rent after 2 days of working. My pay was meager, with excuses that I was slacking back at work. I tried my best, but it seemed like nothing was working out. I couldn't meet up with my rent, and I was sent out. I came back from the site to meet my bags outside the hotel. I didn't know what to do. I slowly picked them up, tears in my eyes. I turned and walked out of the old hotel, destination unknown. I wept. As I walked, I thought of my family depending on me to send them money. But I had nothing to send. I felt like a failure. I walked for hours, not knowing where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, wondering where to go next. But as I looked down at my bags, I knew I had a long way to go. I was still alone, still struggling. And I didn't know when things would get better. As night began to fall, Emmanuel found himself at a bus stop, huddled among other homeless people. They shared stories of their struggles, and Emmanuel realized he was not alone in his suffering. But even in their company, he felt a deep sense of loneliness, a feeling of being completely forgotten by the world. The night wore on, and Emmanuel's hunger turned to despair. He shifted from where the other homeless people are gathered. He thought of his family, wondering if they would ever see him again. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes as he realized how far he had fallen. Just then, a group of thugs approached the bus stop, looking for an easy target. Emmanuel, weak and vulnerable, caught their attention. They began to taunt him, calling him names and threatening to beat him up. Emmanuel, with no strength to defend himself, covered in fear. They beat him up since they couldn't find any valuables with him, but then a figure emerged from the shadows, chasing them away with a fierce determination. The figure turned to Emmanuel, and he saw a kind-faced man with a warm smile and a twinkle in his eye. "Come with me, my friend," the man said. "I'll help you get back on your feet." Emmanuel, with no other options, followed the man, hoping against hope that this stranger might be his ticket out of the darkness. Emmanuel followed the kind-faced man, who introduced himself as Pastor John, to a small church in the heart of the city. The church was a humble building, but it was clean and well-maintained, and Emmanuel could sense a warm and welcoming atmosphere. Pastor John led Emmanuel to a small office, where he offered him a seat and a glass of water. Emmanuel drank the water gratefully, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "So, my friend," Pastor John said, "tell me your story. How did you end up on the streets?" Emmanuel hesitated, unsure of how much to share. But something about Pastor John's kind eyes put him at ease, and he found himself pouring out his heart, telling the pastor about his journey from the village, his struggles to find work, and his eventual descent into homelessness. Pastor John listened attentively, nodding his head and making supportive noises. When Emmanuel finished speaking, the pastor smiled and said, "You are not alone, my friend. We are here to help you. We have a program that can provide you with food, shelter, and job training. Would you like to be a part of it?" Emmanuel's eyes welled up with tears as he nodded eagerly. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Over the next few days, Emmanuel settled into the church's program, receiving warm meals, a comfortable bed, and guidance from Pastor John and his team. He also started attending job training sessions, learning new skills, and gaining confidence. Just as things were starting to look up, Emmanuel received a surprise visit from his past. His old friend Michael appeared at the church, looking prosperous and successful in his tailored suit and shiny car. "Emmanuel, my friend," Michael said with a wide smile. "I heard you were in the city. I had to come and find you." Emmanuel was torn. Part of him was happy to see his old friend, but another part of him was wary. What did Michael want? They chatted for a while, catching up on old times, and Emmanuel found himself relaxing in Michael's presence. But when Michael mentioned a job offer, Emmanuel's guard went up. "What's the job?" he asked, his mind racing. "I'm starting my own business," Michael said. "A tech firm. And I need someone with your skills to help me get it off the ground." Emmanuel was skeptical. Michael had always been ambitious, and Emmanuel wondered if he had an ulterior motive. "What's in it for you?" Emmanuel asked, his eyes narrowing. Michael smiled. "I want to help you, Emmanuel. You're a talented guy, and I believe in you. Plus, I could use a friend by my side as I build this company." Emmanuel hesitated, unsure of what to do. Part of him wanted to trust Michael, but another part of him was wary of getting burned again. "I don't know," he said finally. "I need to think about it." Michael nodded. "I understand. But don't take too long. The offer won't be on the table forever." With that, he stood up and left, leaving Emmanuel to ponder his decision. As he thought about it, Emmanuel realized that he had a choice to make. He could take a chance on Michael's offer, or he could stick with Pastor John and the church. Either way, he knew that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. Emmanuel couldn't shake off the feeling that Michael's offer was too good to be true. He had always been ambitious, but was this opportunity genuine or just a way to exploit Emmanuel's skills? As he pondered his decision, Pastor John approached him with a warm smile. "Emmanuel, my friend, I sense that you're troubled. What's on your mind?" Emmanuel shared his concerns about Michael's offer, and Pastor John listened attentively. "Remember, Emmanuel, that you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Don't rush into anything that doesn't feel right." Emmanuel nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude towards the pastor. He decided to take a few more days to think about the offer, weighing the pros and cons. Meanwhile, Michael's words kept echoing in his mind. "I believe in you, Emmanuel. You're a talented guy." Emmanuel began to wonder if he was selling himself short by staying at the church. Maybe it was time to take a chance and see what the world had to offer. He had always been ambitious, but was this opportunity genuine or just a way to exploit Emmanuel's skills? After thinking hard about it, Emmanuel decided to take a chance and accept Michael's offer. He rationalized that he could always leave if things didn't work out, but he couldn't pass up the opportunity to learn from someone as successful as Michael. The next day, Emmanuel met with Michael at his office. Michael was beaming with excitement as Emmanuel accepted his offer. "Welcome to the team, Emmanuel," Michael said, extending his hand. "I knew you had potential. Together, we're going to do great things." Emmanuel smiled, feeling a sense of excitement and trepidation. He knew that he was taking a risk, but he was ready to put in the work and learn from Michael. As they shook hands, Emmanuel felt a sense of determination wash over him. He was ready to put in the effort and make the most of this opportunity. But little did he know, Michael had ulterior motives for hiring him. And as Emmanuel delved deeper into the company, he began to realize that things were not as they seemed. Emmanuel's POV. "I couldn't believe I had agreed to work for Michael. First, it seemed like a dream come true, a high-paying job and a charismatic boss who seemed to genuinely believe in me. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to feel a growing sense of unease. Michael would call me into his room at all hours of the night, handing me sketches of different houses and asking me to figure out how to get in. First, I thought it was just some kind of security consulting work, but as the houses got bigger and more elaborate, I started to wonder what was really going on. Was this really the company Michael claimed he was building? Or was it something more sinister? I tried to push the thoughts aside and focus on the work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. And then there was the fact that I was living with Michael. He had offered me a room in his sprawling mansion, and I had accepted, thinking it would be a great opportunity to learn from him, but then I started to feel like I was losing myself, like I was just a pawn in Michael's game. Then one night I was relaxing after dinner when Michael told me to get the laptop. I was hesitant when Michael asked me to get his laptop around 8 p.m. that night. We had just finished dinner and I was looking forward to some downtime. But Michael's tone was urgent and I knew I had no choice but to comply. "Come on, Emmanuel, we have some work to do outside the house," he said, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made me uneasy. I reluctantly got up from the couch and followed Michael to the car. One of his friends was already waiting for us, and we drove off into the night. As we drove, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Michael was quiet, his eyes fixed on the road ahead while his friend chatted away on his phone. I was sandwiched between them, feeling like a pawn in a game I didn't understand. Through what felt like an eternity, we arrived at an isolated area. Michael parked the car opposite a big building a few meters away from it. He turned to me and ordered me to scan the building from his laptop. I hesitated, feeling a sense of trepidation. But Michael's eyes were cold, unyielding, and I knew I had no choice but to comply. As I opened the laptop and scanned the building, I saw green and red dots flashing on the screen. Michael counted the red dots, his eyes narrowing as he nodded to himself. He looked at his friend, who nodded back, and they both got out of the car. My heart was racing as I watched them open the boot and take out some things. Michael got back into the car and told me to move to the driver's seat and be at alert. "Stay here and keep watch," he said, his voice low and menacing. I nodded, feeling a sense of unease wash over me. As I watched Michael and his friend move towards the house, I realized with a jolt of fear that they were up to no good. They jumped the fence and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone in the car. I was trapped with no idea what to do. As I waited, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios, I knew I had to get out of there. But as I looked around, I realized I was in the middle of nowhere. I was at Michael's mercy, and I knew I had to be careful if I wanted to make it out alive. As I sat in the car, surrounded by the darkness of the night, I couldn't help but think about how I had ended up in this situation. It was long after Michael and his friend had jumped over the fence, leaving me alone and bewildered. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant hum of a car driving by. I thought back to the events that had led me here. Michael's offer of a job had seemed too good to be true, but I had been desperate for a chance to prove myself. And then there were the sketches of houses, the requests to scan buildings, and it had all seemed so innocent, so legitimate. But now I realized that I had been blind to the truth. Michael was a thief, and I had been his unwitting accomplice. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I felt used, betrayed, and scared. But I knew I had to think clearly if I was going to get out of this situation alive. As I pondered my next move, I heard the distant sound of sirens. First, I thought it was just a police car driving by, but then the sirens grew louder, and I knew we were surrounded. I was trapped with no way out. Police cars screeched to a halt around us, and officers poured out, guns drawn. I was ordered out of the car, and I complied, my hands shaking as I raised them above my head. I tried to protest, to explain that I didn't know what was happening, but a police officer slammed his gun into my head, silencing me. As I fell to the ground, dazed and disoriented, I saw Michael and his friend being dragged out of the building, held at gunpoint by the police. His friend tried to run, but he was shot in the leg and fell to the ground, groaning loudly. I was handcuffed alongside Michael, and we were pushed into the back of a police car. Michael's friend was dragged to another car, his groans growing fainter as we drove away. I cried as we sped through the night, unsure of what lay ahead. How did I end up here? I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would I go to jail? Would I be able to clear my name? The questions swirled in my head, but I knew one thing for sure: I had to get out of this situation alive. As we drove to the police station, I couldn't help but think about how my life had spiraled out of control. Just a few weeks ago, I was a struggling tech enthusiast trying to make a living. Now, I was a suspect in a crime I didn't commit. To be continued. Please encourage me with your likes and comments, folded hands. Watch out for next episode and to subscribe. Story by the Woven